This video series was only supposed to be 4 videos long, but it looks like it's spilling over into a bonus video number 5, because I remembered a couple of stories from Vietnam and from Ecuador. My stories from Vietnam aren't particularly dramatic, but maybe they're interesting and they tie in a little bit with previous stories. The first involved me, and it was very simple and a very dumb one. I had only recently arrived in Southeast Asia. I had been teaching English in South Korea, and I left South Korea to go traveling for a while. And one of my stops was Vietnam. This was back in the 90s. And to me, 90s, when I say that, sounds like a very modern era, because to me it feels very recent. But I guess from the point of view today, the 90s can be 25 or 30 years ago. So that really was a long time ago. And Vietnam was actually quite a different place back then. Surprising to think about it. But when I went there, you weren't allowed to travel around Vietnam freely. I landed in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon. And when I was there, in order to go anywhere else, I had to go to the police and get a travel permit. So what you had to do, you had to plan in advance every city that you wanted to visit. And these could only be cities in between Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi. You weren't allowed to go out of that main corridor. You couldn't go off into the mountains. You couldn't rent a motorcycle and go driving around the northern mountains as you can today. That whole area was closed to foreigners. So I had to go to the police station in Ho Chi Minh City and make a list of all the cities I was going to visit and then apply for a permit to go to those places. And the police issued me a permit with the names of those cities on them, and those were the only places I could go. And if you showed up in a city and checked into a hotel, they would ask for your police permit. At least that's what happened to me. I don't know whether it happened to everyone, but I think it was standard policy at that time. And at the hotel, you had to present your police permit, and they would look to see whether their city was on your permit and you were allowed to even be there. And of course, the police would come at one point during the evening to check the hotel registers and see what foreigners were staying there and whether they had the proper paperwork to be there. So it was quite a different time than it is now. Things have changed a lot. But just like Central and South America from that era, Vietnam had a reputation as being a hotbed of thievery. I heard so many stories. Everyone I talked to had stories. And perhaps it was a little bit of backpacker paranoia, because everyone you talked to had a story, and everyone was always talking about how they'd been robbed or something was stolen from them or something disappeared, and you started to think about it more and more. So maybe it wasn't quite as bad as it seemed to be. But anyway, I was traveling by bus at one point, very early in my time in Vietnam. And again, I wasn't a very experienced sort of person in terms of where I went, not very adventurous, nor was I experienced in what to pack or even how to pack. So I had a backpack filled with all kinds of stuff. And when I got on the bus, I just handed my backpack to the guy and he threw it on the roof along with all the other luggage, and then I got in the bus and I didn't think anything of it. But I had not put a lock on the zipper for my backpack. So when we arrived at our destination, they handed down my backpack and I took it and I went to the hotel, opened it up when I got into my room, and of course, half the contents of my bag were missing. Because while my backpack was up on the roof, people travel on the tops of the buses. You know, the bus is filled with people, and then they put all the luggage on the top. And it's quite common for people to then climb onto the top of the bus, and then they ride the bus up there. So whoever was riding the bus up there saw my backpack, and the zipper was right there. So they just sort of unzipped the bag and helped themselves to whatever they wanted, zipped it closed again, and went about their merry way. I mean, luckily I didn't lose very much. It's not like I was traveling with the crown jewels. Whatever items of real value I had weren't even that valuable, just valuable to me. And they were in my knapsack, which I took inside the bus with me. So in my knapsack, I mean, what did they take? They took a flashlight, a bunch of clothing, I think a pair of shoes, my toiletries kit. For some reason, I was carrying a full-size can of Gillette foamy shaving cream. Go figure. And so, of course, my razor blade and soap and shampoo and a book or two. All that stuff was gone from my bag. So I learned my lesson there. I mean, you can, and you normally do, take your backpack and throw it onto the roof of whatever bus you're taking. But put a lock on the zipper, of course. And these days, most backpacks come with a kind of rain cover. The backpack I have right now, in fact, has a combination rain cover and carrying bag. You can use it to cover up the backpack if it's raining and to protect it from dust and sunlight. But you can also unzip a flap, and then the whole bag will zip closed with the backpack inside it. And you can put a lock on that duffel bag as well, which adds another layer of security. So that's pretty handy. But I had nothing like that back in those days. So, I mean, I still had my backpack when I arrived at my destination, so that's a good thing. But the contents were depleted. So that was my first experience in Vietnam. And then I heard stories from other people of all these crazy techniques they used in Vietnam. One of the crazier ones was the fishing rod technique. They said that in these hotel rooms, people would cut holes in the window screens up near the top, and then they could put through like a fishing rod with a hook on it. And then during the night, while you're sleeping, this hook would come down and try to hook things off the table near your bed, things like that. So whenever I checked into a hotel room in Vietnam, I always looked around for these fishing rod holes. And in fact, the screens in all of my rooms usually had holes in them that looked conveniently placed for this kind of sneak thievery. But they could also have just been holes in the screen, you know, just old holes that just got there over time and were not actually put there by thieves. But every time I saw one of those holes, that's what I was thinking about. My second story from Vietnam that involves me personally was actually the theft of a friend's knapsack. This guy was another Canadian that I just met on the road, and we were doing some traveling together. And we were in one of Vietnam's coastal cities. Might have been Da Nang. I can't swear to that at this point. I don't remember what city this was in. But we were down at the beach, and at these beaches they had stations where there would be like a counter where you could get cold beer, roasted bits of meat and snacks, and then they would have chairs and umbrellas that you could rent for the day. And this isn't a normal thing for me to do, but the two of us went down there to do that, and we settled in on these two lawn chairs on the beach with an umbrella, and we spent a fair number of hours there, if I remember right. And we were paying the rental to this woman at one of these counters. She owned the whole section where we were. And we went there all day long, back to her counter. We were buying cold beer, buying snacks, spending money there all day long, and laughing and joking with her and getting to know her. Eventually coming to think of her as a friend and ally, of course. You know where this story is going. So it's the end of the day, and my friend and I went back up to this counter to settle up the last part of our bill. And my friend took his knapsack and set it down at his feet right outside the counter, got out his wallet, settled his bill, paid her what we owed her, And then the two of us turned and walked away. And we went, I swear, about 10 feet, and he suddenly went, "Oh, my knapsack." He'd forgotten his knapsack. He put it on the ground at his feet, and then he forgot about it. And we got about 10 feet away, and he stopped and said, "Oh, I forgot my backpack." He turned around, and it was gone. Within the 2 or 3 seconds that we had been walking away from this booth, his knapsack had vanished. It was just gone. So we went back to the counter, to this little thing on the beach, and spoke to the woman and said, "Hey, did you see a knapsack? I left it here, I think, and now it's gone. I'm not sure what happened to it." And she, of course, said, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't see a knapsack. I don't know." But my friend was quite suspicious of her at this point. So he went around behind this counter, and sure enough, there was his knapsack tucked away underneath the counter at her feet. So within the seconds that we had turned around to leave, she had darted out front, grabbed it, and then hid it behind her counter, and of course was going to keep it, was going to steal it. And again, that was kind of an eye-opening experience, similar to the one I had in the story I told from Antigua, where I lived with a family for a long time. I boarded with their family and even built a room, built an extension onto their house, ate meals with them all day, studied Spanish with them, played with their kids, all that kind of thing. And then, of course, when I left some things in storage with the family, they took it and sold it. So you might even think, well, these are friends of mine and I can trust them, but you still have to be on your toes a little bit. And this woman in Vietnam, despite us being good customers of hers all day, she, when she had the chance, she snatched that bag and was going to keep it. And to a certain extent, I can understand these situations because there are certain perceptions, especially at that time, about people from Canada or the United States. We were all supposed to be super, super rich, which I can tell you in my case I wasn't, and neither was my friend. And this woman in Vietnam, I'm sure she was thinking, well, whatever's in this knapsack can mean a lot for me. I can sell it and the money will be significant. But this Canadian, he's just going to go home and he can just buy everything new again. It's not going to hurt him very much, and it might help me very much. So they balance that out in their minds and feel like they're not really doing much harm. And to a certain extent, they are right, because even like all the things that were stolen out of my backpack on the bus in Vietnam, I was kind of glad to be rid of them, because who needs to go backpacking with a full-size can of Gillette foamy shaving cream? And I think I had 3 times more clothing than I ever needed or even wore. So this guy did me a favor by taking a lot of junk out of my backpack that I didn't need, and then I didn't have to carry it around anymore. I found another nice country road, so I was able to get off the paved highway for a while. This is really nice. This is what I came out looking to experience and see. Hello. Come here, puppy. Come here. Come here. Come here. One side to all these stories I haven't really talked about is that as a foreigner overseas, sometimes you fall into the trap of thinking that awareness will save you, that no one could ever steal from you because you are too sharp-eyed and you're aware of your surroundings. One thing I learned is that, sure, you can be very aware and more alert than average, but nobody is alert enough to stop all these things from happening. It's just not the way we live. And I got some firsthand evidence of that. Kind of firsthand because I was watching it. This was in Cebu, back in the Philippines. I spent some time in Cebu City, and I had the habit of every morning in this neighborhood where I was living, going out to a cafe for a cup of coffee and writing in my journal, reading a book. And this cafe was right on a busy street with a big window. So I was sitting in the window and I could watch all the people out on the street. And I was quite amused to see that this little stretch of busy street was a popular spot for young pickpockets to hang out and to work. So as I sat there writing in my journal and drinking my coffee, I could watch all these pickpockets going about their trade. And what struck me is that, again, in movies, pickpockets are portrayed as being exceptionally skilled, highly trained. There's schools you can go to be an expert pickpocket where they put bells in every pocket, and you only pass the course if you manage to steal from the dummy or from the person without ringing any of the bells. But in real life, a pickpocket does not have to be that clever or that sneaky or that quiet or anything at all. I saw all these Filipinos, regular normal people, just going to work, and they would come up to a street corner waiting for the light to turn so they can cross, and they're just standing there looking around, maybe looking at their phone. And one of these boys, one of these pickpockets, would come up behind them, and if there was a woman with a purse over her shoulder, he would come up behind her and just sort of reach over and unzip the purse and then be able to look inside. And he could do almost anything he wanted to do, and the woman would never, ever notice, because all her attention is focused this way, and then the kid would be behind her, and she wouldn't see him and she wouldn't feel him. And again, there was nothing special about that kid. It was just, you don't notice these things. And people who had knapsacks on their back, like I have mine now, the kid would walk up behind them and just walk with them for a block, for 2 blocks, and have all the time in the world to sort of try to open one of the zippers and try to take things out of the bags. Now, I should say at this point, I never saw them take anything. I never saw a successful theft. All I saw were the boys trying to do it. Had they managed to get anything out, I was poised to run out the door and sort of stop it from happening. If I was fast enough to do it, which in retrospect was probably unlikely. But I never did see any of them actually steal anything. But what struck me was how easy it was for them just to walk beside people, behind people, and have all the time in the world to try and take things from them. And the people never even knew they were there. And if you watch CCTV videos on YouTube of these sorts of thefts happening, that's also a part of each story, where someone is standing at the side of the road, looking at their smartphone, reading a message or typing a message, whatever they're doing, and then you can see someone come up behind them on a bicycle or on foot and walk past them, snatch the phone out of their hands, run, and they're gone. Or if you're sitting in a cafe with your laptop or smartphone sitting on the table, person comes up behind you, you don't see them until it's too late. They grab your phone and they start running and they're gone. So being aware of your surroundings is good, but I find it's really impossible to be aware enough. Anyway, that was something I thought of when I was thinking of those pickpocket boys in the Philippines. That gave me so much amusement. My remaining stories, and where I'll end this video series, all took place in Ecuador. And Ecuador is another one of those countries that just seem to be rife with thievery and robbery of all descriptions. And me personally, I only had one experience myself, but I was kind of a witness to, or at least I heard stories from so many other people, and I'll talk about those a little bit. But to talk about those other stories, I have to set the stage a little bit. I was staying in Quito, the capital city of Ecuador, and I found a hotel in Old Quito, like right in the heart of the old city. And I wasn't aware of it at the time. I don't think I knew anything about this hotel, but it was a very typical, very romantic, kind of exotic backpackers hostel. It actually cost $1 a night for my room, so it was basically $30 US a month to stay there. And it was in this beautiful old building right on a corner overlooking one of the main squares of Old Quito, with a beautiful, Spanish colonial cathedral there. Very historic, historical area, historical cathedral. A lot of activity going on in the square all the time. And my room was right on the corner and had a beautiful wraparound window right on the corner. I was up on the 3rd or 4th floor, and I could sit in the window and just watch all the life around me in Quito. It was a beautiful place, an amazing place to hang out. And I think the bottom second and third floors of this building were a local brothel. So of course there was all kinds of activity going on down there. There's always so much excitement there. In the streets, for example, in that part of Old Quito, there would be people selling things on these carts with wheels. They would roll these carts along, stop them, and they're selling food and snacks and drinks and toys, knickknacks, souvenirs, anything they could think of. But technically all of that was illegal. So almost like clockwork, every day you would suddenly hear a whistle or someone shouting and yelling, and it was a signal that the police were coming. And then all the people on the streets with these carts would just start gathering stuff up and then just start running away as fast as they can. And they would all scatter. And then as soon as they were gone, the police would come along and they would catch and fine anyone who was left. And then as soon as the police were gone, all the people would come back out and set up their stalls again, and life would go back to normal. So it was a very interesting neighborhood. And one more interesting thing about this hotel is that for some reason it had become popular with Japanese backpackers. This particular hotel, the name of it and the location and the fact that it was so cheap, had made its way into Japanese guidebooks. So the vast majority of people staying at this place were young backpackers from Japan. And it was from them, the most trusting people in the world, that I got most of my stories about theft in Ecuador. To start with my own story, very small story in its way. I was taking a bus to another part of Ecuador. I can't remember where the bus was going, but it was your typical bus for that part of the world, old and rickety and kind of crowded, a long, difficult journey. I got on this bus. I think I had an aisle seat, and then a local man came on and he sat down beside me. I believe he took the window seat, and at first he struck me as kind of a typical annoying man who just takes up more room than he needs. He settled into his seat and he kind of did the man spreading thing with his knees spread out wide, taking up all kinds of room. And then he kind of slumped over. He fell asleep after a while, apparently, and he fell over and was leaning, resting against me, which was a little bit annoying, but I just left him there. And worst of all, as he settled in to take his nap, he got out a big blanket and he shook out the blanket, draped it over himself, but he did it in such a casual way that it draped over me as well. So this blanket was covering him and it was covering me. And I thought that was a bit annoying, but I left it alone. I wasn't that worried about it. I'm just trying to be friendly and not cause any kind of problems. And while I was sitting there, I'd put my knapsack on my waist, on my lap. I put my bag on my knees to keep it safe there because, well, there was no room to put it anywhere else. And of course it had all my valuable things in it, so I was keeping it on my lap to keep it safe. But this guy, when he sat down beside me and draped the blanket over himself, he had also draped that blanket over my knapsack as he draped it over me. And at the time, I didn't think anything of that. But after a certain amount of time had passed, I felt something weird. I felt something strange happening underneath this blanket. And I tried to ignore it at first. Thought, who knows what's going on there. But then it caught my attention more and more. So eventually I lifted up the blanket really quickly. And of course, it was this guy. And his hand, he had snuck his hand underneath the blanket over to my knapsack and had undid all the zippers on my knapsack. And he was now feeling around inside my knapsack, trying to find things to steal. So the whole thing he did was sitting there, pretending to fall asleep, leaning against me, draping the blanket over me and over my knapsack. All of that was part of this attempt to cover up his attempt to pickpocket my knapsack, which was sitting on my lap. When I discovered that this man sitting beside me was trying to steal things from my knapsack, of course I reacted. It's like, hey, you know, what are you doing? You know, and he immediately jumped up, pushed past me, grabbed his blanket, and he started making his way up the bus towards the front door to get out of the bus and run away. And without thinking about it, I jumped to my feet, and I spoke some Spanish at that time, and I was shouting at him as he was going up the bus, you know, thief, thief, saying the word in Spanish. That man tried to rob me. He's a thief, kind of wanting my revenge, I guess. And now, looking back and thinking about everything I said about what happened in Indonesia and Philippines, and thinking that it really is not that great an idea, or maybe it's not that great an idea to point at people and accuse them of being a thief, because you don't know what kind of a reaction you're going to get from local people or from the police. You could cause a lot more terrible things to happen to that person than you intended. But at that time, of course, I did leap to my feet and I was, thief, thief, I was shouting as I was pointing at him. But of course, nobody on the bus did anything. Nobody really reacted in any way, which again ties in with my earlier story that when you are the victim of a theft or robbery, contrary to what you see on TV and in movies, normally nobody is there to help you, at least not in the moment. So you're pretty much on your own, and shouting, "Stop that man, stop that thief," is usually not going to accomplish very much. But most of the stories I heard in Ecuador involved the Japanese backpackers that I mentioned. As I said, my hotel there was filled with Japanese backpackers. They're very nice people, very trusting people. They've got their own ways of doing things. One really interesting thing about the Japanese at this guest house was that they were very interested in taking lessons. This is something they took from their childhood. I used to teach English privately in South Korea, and a lot of my students are actually Japanese expats, like the children of Japanese expat families that were living in Seoul. And the children of Japanese families and Korean families, they tend to have their lives scheduled around classes. So they go to school all day long from dawn until dusk, and then as soon as they get home, their parents have set up private tutors for them. So at 6 o'clock, the math tutor comes, and 7 o'clock, the piano teacher. Then at 8 o'clock, the Chinese teacher. And at 9 o'clock, I show up, I'm the English teacher. And they have classes scheduled basically from the second they wake up until it's time to go to bed. And then they start all over again the next morning. That seemed to be their lives, you know. And these Japanese backpackers hanging out in Ecuador, they duplicated that lifestyle. So while they were in Quito, a lot of them were staying long-term, like I was, and they would sign up for classes. So they would sign up for salsa classes, for Spanish classes. When they learned that I was an English teacher, they all wanted to hire me to give them English classes in the hotel. They just wanted to take classes all over the place, and they were smart enough that if one of them was taking a salsa class and paying for that class for private lessons, that Japanese backpacker would then come back to the hotel and teach the other Japanese backpackers. So they would learn a dance move from a professional teacher, then they come back to the hotel, and on the rooftop of the hotel, they would schedule a class where all the other Japanese backpackers would come out, and they would be the teacher for them and teach them salsa. So they learn salsa in a private class, then they come back and they teach salsa on the rooftop to all the other Japanese travelers. And they did that with music classes, with language classes, dance classes, cooking classes. They just organized their whole life. Even though they were on holiday, they still ended up with a full schedule of classes. So there's this kind of a mindset amongst the Japanese, I found, of doing what was expected of them. They were doing things the way they understood things were supposed to happen. You know, they followed the rules and they trusted that things would be okay. And this often got them in trouble. I heard so many stories like that. And the craziest one, the most extreme one, involved a hill. This was in Old Quito. There's a famous hill in the city with a aluminum statue on top. I think it's called Panaceo, the Virgin of Quito, and I believe it's the tallest aluminum statue in the world. That's its claim to fame, but it's popular because from there you get beautiful views of Quito. It's a gorgeous place to go. And in the guidebooks that all the Japanese backpackers used, it said that everyone should go to the top of this hill for the amazing views. So it was on the list of all the attractions that every Japanese traveler is going to see when they're in Quito. And it said in the guidebooks that you really should walk up to the top because it's more beautiful and more interesting. So that's what their guidebook said. But everyone else knew, it was common knowledge, that walking up that hill was kind of taking your life in your hands. It was known to be very dangerous, that there were thieves all over those hills. There were kind of shanty towns on the pathways leading up this hill, and a lot of people got robbed at knife point and at gunpoint as the tourists were, going up to this lookout point. So a lot of people knew it's not a good idea to walk up that hill. But in the Japanese guidebooks, that's what it says they should do. So time and time and time and time again, a new Japanese backpacker would show up at that hotel where I was staying, and they would go off to climb to the top of that hill to see Quito from up there and take pictures. Then they come back to the hotel. I run into them. They're looking very sad and very upset. And I look at them and say, "You got robbed?" And he's like, "Yeah, I got robbed." Because all these Japanese backpackers, they all went walking up that hill, and every single one of them, it seemed, got robbed at knife point. They all did. And I heard that same story over and over again. Some guy goes up the hill, comes back to the hotel. He looks at me and I look at him. "Robbed?" "Yeah, I got robbed." It happened over and over again. But that was Quito, that was Ecuador. And I should say, to be totally honest, I also walked up the hill because I guess I have that feeling that nothing bad will ever happen to me. But I did go walking up that hill just like all the Japanese. I really don't like taking buses anywhere, as you can tell. And whether I was lucky or a little bit bigger, a little bit more imposing, I don't know. Nobody robbed me. I did see groups of men on my way up that looked a little bit sketchy, but yeah, nobody bothered me on my way to the top. So I made the walk, the climb up, and I was not robbed at knife point, but it seems like every Japanese backpacker, or every second one, did seem to get robbed there. Another common story in Ecuador from that time involves internet cafes, and it connects with what I was talking about, how it's really difficult to be super aware of your surroundings, because in those days internet cafes were very common and very popular, particularly for backpackers, and you could happily spend hours in there uploading photos and sending emails back home, whatever you're doing. And when people sit down at a computer, they'll often take their knapsack, put it down on the floor next to their feet, and they think it's safe because it's literally 6 inches away from them. And then they're on the computer for an hour, 2 hours. And then when they get up to leave, they look down and their bag is gone. So it's really quite easy to be distracted enough for a thief to even remove like a knapsack that's sitting right at your feet and you don't even see them. And if you watch, again, CCTV video clips on YouTube about this, thieves will often work in pairs. If you're sitting at a coffee shop table and you've got your bag over here on your left, or your phone is sitting on the table on your left, someone will come from the right and ask you a question. So you turn to the right and you're talking with this person, giving them all your attention, and their partner is on the left, and they just grab your phone and walk away. And I don't care how super alert you think you are and how good your peripheral vision you think it is, you won't notice in that situation. So yeah. Theft and robbery overseas. I think one reason the Japanese were so trusting in Ecuador was that they themselves are so honest. I had experience of that myself on a short trip to Japan. When I was living and working in Korea, I would often make a short trip to Japan if I needed to renew my visa or something like that. Well, that was the closest place to go. And on my very first trip to Japan, I went to the city of Fukuoka. I flew there, I think, on that trip. And then I took a taxi from the airport to a hotel that I'd picked out in advance. And I was a little bit flustered by the whole experience. I wasn't paying enough attention to my surroundings, I guess. And when we got to the hotel, I got out my full money belt. So I had a money belt with everything in it, my passport, all of my ID, all of my money, traveler's checks, addresses, phone numbers. Everything was inside that money belt, as well as my cash, which was a very dumb thing to do. But I got out that money belt, and then I took money out to pay the taxi driver, and then something must have distracted me. I'm gathering up my knapsack from inside the taxi, and I got out, closed the door, went into the hotel, went up to the desk to check in. And as I was trying to check in and they asked to see my passport, I realized I didn't have my money belt anymore. I had left it in the taxi. This was a disaster. Again, this was long before the days of smartphones and the internet, and I was there only for a weekend. It was supposed to be a very quick trip because on Monday I had to be back in Korea, back at my job. And if I lost my passport and all my money and all my addresses, everything, there was no way I was going to make it back to Korea by Monday. By the time I got back to Korea, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have a job anymore. So it was bad. It was a bad situation to be in. But the Japanese honesty came through for me because the clerks at the hotel, they didn't really speak English, but they were willing to work with me enough to help me out. And after perhaps maybe an hour and a half, they'd made a few phone calls for me to track down information. And it turns out that the very next customer that got into that taxi right after I got out found my money belt, gave it to the taxi driver, and the taxi driver gave it to the police at the very next police box that they passed. because in this city they had little police boxes at the intersections where the police were monitoring traffic and directing it. And the next passenger gave it to the driver. The driver gave it to the very first police officer he found, and my hotel called the local police station, and they said, yeah, we have a money belt here belonging to someone from Canada, so he can come pick it up. And you want to talk about relief coursing through your veins. I felt that relief, let me tell you. And I went down to the police station and went into a little room there, and they had my money belt and all of the contents of my money belt spread out over the table, because they were just going over it to see who it belonged to and what it contained. And so in Japan, I lost everything, and I got everything back within an hour and a half, 2 hours. So that was my experience of Japan, how honest and trusting the people there are. And I think they take that trusting attitude with them when they go overseas, and they often find out that people around them are not always quite as honest as they are, and it gets them into trouble. And those are all of the stories I can think of right now about experiences I've had around the world in terms of thieves and robbers. Yeah, it's fun to tell those stories as I walk around here in the countryside around Mae Sot. I'm just getting back into city limits now, and to my surprise, there's actually a brand new hotel out here. There's the hotel there, Mansion 1. Good place to stay, I guess, if you are a businessman and you have a car and you don't mind being outside of the city. And what do you know? I stumbled across a Mae Sot-based FM radio station. Ooh, let's get out of the sun here. There's the tower up there. 103.75 megahertz on your FM dial. You can tune into Mae Sot, I guess. I never listen to the radio anymore. I just listen to podcasts. So I should check out this radio station if I can find it. And there's a dog over there that really hates me. Let's see if he finds me today. So far, it's not around. I escaped. I am back in Mae Sot proper, back on the main street once more, and I thought I'd walk this direction to see if Braverly Cafe is open today, and if it's open, I'm going to pop in and get a nice coffee and relax. Hopefully they have the door closed today and the air conditioning on. Find out when I get there. But that is the end of all my stories. And I hope you enjoyed a little bit of that, my rambling about some experiences I've had over the years as I walk around the countryside around Mae Sot. But I really enjoyed that walk. It was interesting to get a glimpse into another side of this part of Thailand. So that is it. Stay safe. Try not to be robbed like me. And I'll see you in the next video.